Welcome back to Book Bandit, where we plunder the library and bookstores all for our latest read. For this episode of Book Bandit, I picked a nice cozy mystery in the Miss Silver series by Patricia Wentworth, The Poison in the Pen. It was published in 1955 and revolves around a series of poisoned pen letters, a seeming suicide, and some funky goings-on in a small village. Wentworth's sleuth, Miss Maud Silver, is very Marple-esque, so I did some research to find out a little more about Wentworth. She was a contemporary of Agatha Christie, somewhat. She was about 13 years older than Christie, but Wentworth started her Miss Silver series in 1928, while Miss Marple's first book was a few years later. However, a short story featuring Miss Marple appeared shortly before the first appearance of Miss Silver. I think it's fair to conclude that Wentworth and Christie came up with their ideas independently, and there was some cultural thirst for clever silver-haired ladies being underestimated by the dregs of villainy. Wentworth would have been about 51 when the first Miss Silver came out, The Grey Mask, I believe, and Christie would have been about 40 when her first Marple novel was published. 37, she would have been 37 with the short story. I wonder whether there were real-life clever old ladies running around solving mysteries, and that's what inspired them. Or is it more like a cultural zeitgeist thing, like the two Robin Hood movies coming out at the same time, the two disaster movies twice? I think it's all we remember are the summers of Robin Hood or the summers of the disaster movies. I'm not that old. What I find astonishing is that Wentworth wrote 32 Miss Silver mysteries. 32. I love cozy mysteries. One of my favorite podcasts is all about Agatha, and I am a Christie-phile. I can't remember who recommended this book to me. Perhaps it was an algorithm. But I read the first in the series, The Grey Mask, last year, and then picked up another at random to read this year. Honestly, I can't get enough of mysteries, and even the disappointing ones are worth a read. My initial feeling is that this book is pretty by the numbers. The apparent suicide is clearly telegraphed as no such thing. My immediate thoughts are that our detective, Miss Silver, is a bit dull, sadly, and has no real personality. That I thought everything was a murder, there were no real suicides, and that I identified the murderer right away. This took the wind out of my sails a bit, as I prefer to be surprised. But in the end, my attention morphed instead rather than who done it to why done it. Was there a past done it? And how was it related to the past and to the relationships among the characters? I have to say, nothing actually surprised me in the book. However, toward the end, the conversations between Miss Silver and the chief constable started interesting me more and more. It was almost a class act in the art of logical thinking. All right, let's talk about what actually happens blow by blow. Here is your spoiler warning. The little village of Tilling Green is being beset by poisoned pen letters. One person has already committed suicide because of a letter, and Miss Silver, our intrepid elderly amateur detective, is encouraged by friends and the chief constable, March, an old friend, to insert herself in the village to discover the perpetrator. She travels to the village to stay with a friend named Miss Wayne, whose sister had recently died and therefore has a room to let. What starts as a non-violent crime soon escalates as two more deaths occur, the last of which is definitely a murder. Of the 3 deaths, 2 are young women, friends of each other actually, and the third is an older man. Given that it is a small village, the deaths of course are all related to each other and to the poisoned letters. The conversations between Miss Silver's old friend, Chief Constable March, show a depressing tendency to insist that the murder may not be related, when it is clear that they are. The constable is determined to go with the easiest explanation for each murder without looking at the whole picture. Thus, the first is a suicide, the second is probably a suicide, or an accident, and the third is murder, but by the spouse, of course. An interesting element is actually the dynamic between Miss Silver and the chief constable, who is a young man who she tutored when he was a child and evidently removed some barrier to his marriage. This sounds as if it is a reference to a previous novel that I haven't read yet. The relationship between the two is more interesting than it sounds, where there is an intellectual power differential, but much of it is due to the fact that the constable still feels like a schoolboy when he's talking with Miss Silver. She does take quite a didactic approach with him while they talk through the possibilities, and I find a lot of the constable's resistance quite perplexing, resisting even when the logic was irrefutable. In the end, the murder was revealed. Spoiler warning again, as Miss Wayne, who I suspected from the first. I can't put my finger on why she made me suspicious. I just thought it was pretty obvious. I immediately speculated on her motive and the recent death of her sister, which rang an alarm bell. It was revealed that Miss Wayne was a psychopath whose sister knew that what she was and always monitored her and controlled her. The one thing I was wrong on was that I suspected she had murdered her sister so that she could be free to indulge her murderous impulses, which was not true. Her sister just died, and then Miss Wayne felt free to write poison pen letters and engage in other negative behavior. Finally, the pacing of the book was off. It lagged in the middle, so that I kept checking how many chapters were left. And then it sped up toward the end. I did very much like the reveal of Miss Wayne's character and found it bizarrely funny that she pretended she was murdering a child when it turns out to be a cat in the cupboard. In the end, the book felt incomplete some way, just shy of satisfying. I would rate this as a solid read, but not reread material. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on The Poison in the Pen? Have you read this book? Do you agree with my take? What should I read next? Your recommendations are key, so don't be shy. Drop your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a book-filled day.